Hey, Frode.
Hello. Turning off some music and things. Listening to a fantastic work music session. I'll give you the link actually in case you're interested. How are you?
I'm okay. I have to leave in an hour
That is allowed.
because I have a meeting on this
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Very interesting.
anthropology. Yeah.
You know, because of that, because you're probably going to be asleep, I want to show you the first few slides of the symposium.
Okay.
Oh no, opening the wrong thing. I've been pretty focused on the social side of things for this symposium. I've been much less strict about how to organize people to speak and all of that stuff, partly because of other issues. By the way, I'd like you to introduce you to Livia Polanyi. Well, how do you pronounce it? Polanyi. Polanyi. Oh, hang on, we need to change the camera. It's the first
Hello.
one.
Hello.
Where are we from?
New York City at the moment.
New York City. You're obviously not in New York City now.
No, I'm not. No, no, not through any magic, digital magic. I'm actually sitting next.
Well, I wouldn't put it past with AI now. We can be anywhere
It's true.
or think we are.
Mhm.
Yeah, we could even be virtually sharing screen, couldn't we?
That's right, exactly.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find settings for the camera so that oh, here we go. Center stage. That may more easily show both of us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. I just changed the first few slides. I just wanted to show.
I think I have, let me see if I can, maybe I could put that up above.
Hello, Leon. You are muted, of course. Oh, there we go.
Hello, hello.
Exit full screen. Now move this up.
So,
Come on.
Leon, this is Livia. You guys are having dinner tomorrow.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
So, Rob,
Looking
I'm going to do
forward.
everything I can in this meeting to
Okay.
make you feel excluded and horrible so that you will join us next year. That's the psychology of it.
How successful can he be?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, Leon and Livia, I just wanted to share something here to show, well, because you won't work tomorrow. I don't know who else is joining us, but we'll see. Fabian is going to be a little bit late, but you can see the screen, of course, right?
I can, yes.
Yeah, great. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the tone of the meeting, of the symposium, which should also be the same as the tone for our meetings in general. So that's why I wanted to put that up now. And the reason it reminded me to, or made me think of putting it up is Edgar, my son, that I talk about incessantly. He's doing a poem recital either today or tomorrow. Now We Are Six by A.A. Milne. And that's been really good, very interesting. And then we decided randomly to look up A.A. Milne in Wikipedia. We know he did Winnie the Pooh and stuff, but did you know that his teacher at a point was H.G. Wells? That's pretty cool. And also, he played cricket with J.M. Barrie, Arthur Conan Doyle, and P.G. Wodehouse. So what I really like about this is the collection of people who care about something, in this case, literature.
Yeah.
And then we can look at the lunatics or the Lunar Society of Birmingham. Darwin, Erasmus, he was the grandfather, grandfather. John Baskerville, the typeface. Ben Franklin, he did some stuff in America. William Herschel, Joseph Priestley, who invented some of the charts we use today, Wedgwood, and all these amazing people. They would get together and talk. That they were called the lunatics because they met in the evening or something like that. Actually, I don't know who these last ones are. Not famous enough.
Famous.
Not famous enough, so they get purged.
Oh,
Just for simplicity of the point that I'm making.
did Baskerville have a hound?
Delete. Hello, Mr. Mark. You'll see this tomorrow. I'm just showing it now to illustrate the kind of community that we're trying to have, the kind of, okay, I'll go back. I'll go back a little bit because this is very important for you as well, Mark. So this is the first few slides of the slides on Wednesday, the tone of what we're doing. So A.A. Milne, one of his teachers was H.G. Wells, and it turns out he played cricket with these guys. That's pretty cool. And then there was a lunatic society that had all these amazing people. So many times in history, people who make a real difference come together for one way or another. Of course, we know at SRI, Doug's people work together. Imagine being part of the discussions in that lab, or imagine being part of Xerox PARC, which Livia was, hence the pause. Or
Oh.
Bandley 5, where Bruce Horn was. Bandley 5, for those of you who don't bleed Macintosh, that's where the Mac was invented first. So what we're trying to do with this community is to have a distributed, casual, friendly, and passionate community about the future of thought, primarily with text and extended in many dimensions. I'll probably reword that a little bit. It's a bit messy, but the point of it is that this is about the community. And what I think would be nice to talk about a little bit today with you guys is how you want this community to be and grow. And grow, I'm not saying we're aiming for mass popularity, absolutely not. But we need to make sure that people like us feel really comfortable. And by us, I mean sharing the passion. We obviously need to be as inclusive as possible. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Hey, Ruth, you want to come in and join this conversation?
I'd love it, but I'm not even decent.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Ruth.
Thank you.
She says she's not decent yet, so maybe she'll come in. She's a world expert on creativity and would certainly have something to add to this conversation.
Yeah, well, that would be good to hear. That would be good to hear. So, yeah, that was the reason I put this up on the screen. Hi, Peter.
Hello.
I
Just finished breakfast. So.
a couple of
Hi, Peter.
slides. I'll go through again on Wednesday. Basically, how we're really, really lucky. We have some disparate people with all kinds of specialities in this community. And in order to keep it together and to keep it legendary, how do you want it to be? Obviously, some of us will meet tomorrow. Excuse me. Yeah, tomorrow and the day after, because we're going to meet the day before. I just want to hear from you guys what you think. More chats or documents or something else or less or what? Leon is about to talk. Everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I I was trying to find this hand icon. Yeah, so
boom, did it automatically. Yeah, sorry.
There's one on the end of your arm.
So I was thinking that maybe in the symposium, but also in general, it would be nice to first of all have, like you already said, a multidisciplinary angle, because I'm noticing that you can get a lot out of the internet, but everything is sort of like guiding you in a sort of rabbit hole of the same, all these algorithms. So I think that's where the multidisciplinary, is very handy. And another thing, what it's actually already the case, like a nice mix of, let's say, very a mix of people where we have, let's say, everything ranging from academic to non-academic.
I completely agree with you. That is what I'm aiming for. And there are a few people this week who are not sure if they should join us, which means they should. Right? It shouldn't be the same. We have quite a few developers coming, which I think is really, really good right now. I think now is the time for XR for reasons you've heard a million times. But it is even more crucial that we are as broad as possible. And this is something that is not for me to do only. It really is up to you. If you have a friend or may or may not be interested, remember, you're not paying to be here, and I'm not paying you to be here. You don't have to be here every week. Look at Mark. He had work to do this summer, so he wasn't here for a month or so. Fine. Right? It's a bit embarrassing for me when no one shows up. It's happened twice. Right? But the whole point is that we have a community where we go when we can, and it has to feel really safe and friendly. So if you have a friend, get them in for a session. If they don't like it, okay, that's sad, but there we go. In fact, for the symposium, I've asked one friend who was a builder, Ukrainian, if he wanted to come, he might. And one of the other dads at my son's school, who is in finance, he has no idea what this is, but it's nice food and a nice place, so he may come along. And that's enough.
Nice.
Maybe they will have an insight or not.
Mhm.
Horrible wine outside. I'm gonna have to check the window. Sorry. What's going on? Okay, what's the window? Oh, yeah, please.
Something very interesting happened. The camera was zooming away from you to. What is going on here? This is quite advanced.
Quite a few systems have it now. This happens to be the Apple 27-inch studio display with a built-in camera that does this center stage. So if it's only me, it will follow me. If there's more than one person, they will be included. It's kind of cool.
Interesting.
But Mark, what did you want to say?
Well, I was just trying to answer your earlier question. I think my reflection on the sort of, well, gosh, years now, I guess, of sort of being in this salon is that the insights aren't actually in the instant. I find they're normally in reflection. So that to me, the whole point is to be amongst people who have absolute experience I don't have. Redundant. Yeah, there comes a point where being in a room with people in your discipline or whatever becomes redundancy, and also it's very difficult not to sort of lapse into a group think or just overemphasis on harmony when actually it's a little bit it's the loose bits around the edges where the things collide, which I think are where the interesting things fall out. The difficult thing is, serendipity is hard to manufacture. I think the best one can hope for is to create conditions for its possible happening, which is difficult because in an age when we're increasingly transactional, and our sort of tendency is to start by saying, "What do I get out of this?" At which my reply would be, I think you're starting in the wrong place. If you're looking for something, you're probably trying a bit hard, because actually, I think it's the reflection on the different insights and the different perspectives that come in that I found interesting, and they often sit and then potter about and resonate for a week or two before any great insight pops out. But that's good. I like that. Now, to me, it's a reason to do it. It's just breaking out this tendency to go and sit with birds of a feather rather than to walk across the room and sit down with a bunch of people with whom essentially, that's not that you have nothing in common. That implies a sort of antipathy, but it's just a thing. People who know stuff you don't is always a wonderful thing. I think that's it.
Yeah,
That's almost everybody.
yeah, sorry, Olivia, please.
Yeah, well, I think another perspective which is really important is one of age. That I think this kind of community would be greatly informed and enhanced if there were people in their late 20s, in their early 30s, who have an entirely different relationship and an entirely different history when it comes to information. I mean, I remember when my son, about whom I talk incessantly, was small, maybe 8 or 10. So that was at the beginning of early 2000s. And something came up. I forgot what it was. And I was thinking, well, it might be this, it might be that. And he looked at me, he said, Mom, ask the web. So the whole notion of where information is, where knowledge is, how you access it, what you want to do with it, I think that younger people have a very interesting and rather different perspective on it. And I think that that would be some outreach that could be very valuable.
Yes, there's no question about that. We have had periods of younger people coming in, but here's the thing. Hardly anyone gives a monkeys about the future of text. Right now, we're quite lucky because the whole VR, AR, XR thing is quite hype-worthy. So that's, I don't talk about the future of text as much. I tend to talk about work in VR. So when I then talk to people who don't really do VR, there's like, hang on, am I appropriate? It's like, yes, but we have to get the interest too. So absolutely very important to get the ages. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, I thought on that. I mean, I at first I totally agree. It's just another axis of difference, and we forget that all too easily. And other people's normalities, which age is one. But it does make me think about and something that it's interesting. An aspect of age is you begin to realize what doesn't persist, and so one of the things, in a sense, the ubiquity, at least in Western polities, of just being able to go on the web at any hour, in any place, in any sort of situation, actually gives a full sense of persistence. And it's amazing how much every day is actually just winking out of knowledge. Somebody turns off a server somewhere, never to be turned on again, gone. Might be in the Internet Archive, probably not. And I was reflecting on this too, because I've been another sort of forum I engage in. Someone who started by saying they wanted to make a catalogue of their books. And the interesting question was, well, what do you want to do with it? Do you just want to record where they exist in your house? Or, is this actually going to be a nexus of your note taking or something? And it occurred to me, someone was writing about how you might collect all this information. And it occurred to me that one of the things I've been really surprised by is the fact that, for instance, most publishers now don't even list books that aren't on their current sales. So they publish this stuff. They are arguably the reference of record. And yet they often claim no title. No, in other words, if you live in a world where it's only true if you can find it online, then a lot of this stuff doesn't actually exist, or it only exists in things like Google Books, which aren't always accurate. They get what they can, because one of the polluting problems is people want to sell you stuff. So they don't want to tell you about the thing you have or want it to, in some way, memorialize or just reference. They want to sell you a new one, which may not be the same as the old one. So there is some value in knowing where things are. Sorry, I got off a slight tangent, but where this starts is an interesting thing to try and share across, as it were, an age axis, is this presumption that we don't need to, or we don't need to learn some things in the way we did because they'll always be there. And I think I'm learning, not by design or intent, but I'm learning at the moment is that just doesn't hold true.
Or that we don't learn things the way we did because people are learning things in an entirely different way. So basically, from a historical perspective, it could be interesting to say, oh, we learned it this way, or people in the 18th century learned it this way. But in fact, people are learning things now. And I think that's a very important, it's a very important distinction. And especially if we're talking about the future of text. I mean, I'm 75 years old. I don't have a lot of future text or no text going on here, okay? But younger people clearly do. And if we're talking about what do we envision the future of text to be, we're not really necessarily thinking about it for what it's going to be like for us if we're thinking about the future in a wider sense.
Absolutely. So the question is, what will change and what won't? And one of the things, my son is learning handwriting, which is really, really important. And I think handwriting will become more important over time as we get better tablets and we get better text interpretations. But also, when he's learning keyboarding, he's learning and making sure he learns it properly. And you could say that the keyboard, for instance, will become obsolete. I don't think so at all, because when you speak, you use a different part of your brain than when you type. So it's a very, just to, click here and then do a speech insertion. So I think you're absolutely right that we need to look at what will change and what is new. But there's a lot of good stuff that we're kind of forgetting, especially the handwriting.
Rode, have you checked out the Apple Sonoma handwriting to dictation transition feature? You can switch back and forth without making any commands.
Oh, speech. Yes. Yes, I have. And
Yeah, so you can dictate and then you can type and then you can dictate and the cursor changes with each one. I saw a demo of it and I haven't tried it yet, but except
it's really, really good. It's astoundingly good, but it's also a different thing. So I use my watch most of the time to communicate via text with friends. With my wife, I will just tell Siri what to do, and it's so good now that I don't check the messages anymore. If there's a small typo, who cares? It's just astounding. But when it comes to writing some kind of a document where you're doing a layout, sometimes, yes, it's useful and nice, but that's that part. To do kind of the editing and to kind of do a more reflective writing, I still think using fingers is better. In other words, depends on the context or job.
yeah, it also is much more predictive. It'll suggest a whole sentence.
Yeah, I find that to be, and it can be really annoying because I've been writing a lot today to edit for my thesis, which has to go in on Wednesday, which is scary. And when I write a word and I see that it is about to predict the rest of it, if I do one character too much, it thinks I've completed and it won't do it. So I have to relearn how to write for that. And that's the kind of thing I enjoy, but I can also see that it can be a bit of a challenge. And it's a worthwhile experiment, that's for sure. I do look forward to, so my initial advisor, Wendy Hall, she's academic Southampton, so high level, meaning she's also a politician. She doesn't have so much time. And she said something really interesting once. She doesn't have time to write a paper. She wants to assemble things. I think that's so provocative, to be able to take a bit of a tweet, a bit of this, and to make it coherent. It can be a really interesting challenge. So that's probably where AI predictive stuff can help us. As I was saying to Mark the other day, and then it has a choice of what I said the other day almost, you know what I mean? Different degrees of that. But I still personally think that when it comes to editing, as I was talking to Livia earlier, I'm dyslexic. I find it really, really hard when I have a large amount of text in front of me, what the different text blocks represent. So this weekend, I've been looking at different use of color, different modes to highlight different things and so on. I think getting things out is one thing, but once you have a ton of text and you want to sculpt it into something, it becomes a very different beast. And that will continue to be visual. And hopefully we can make it better visual. But there's so few of us. I don't think we need to do the hand, but thank you, Leon. That's nice.
I was just
listening to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there also I was just wondering that if you write down text, so you hear yourself creating the sentences and you write it down, is there any connection that it might improve your speech as well? Like, is there some kind of, is anybody aware of any study which shows that if you actually write down word for word some sentences, does it have any benefits to your speech?
Over to you.
Well, I was just thinking about that. I mean, in response to what you were saying, which is that people are not in any way the same in how they relate to written language, spoken language, language in general, images, and that sort of thing. So, for example, most people either, if you will, think in language or they think in images. Well, some people, for example, my husband doesn't actually think in either one. Okay. And he actually thinks essentially in, as far as we've been able to tell, abstract kinds of representations, which are neither image-based nor language-based. So then when you start thinking about, well, what would be the relationship between this and that and the other thing? Well, it turns out that one would have to be thinking about the fact that people actually, their relationships between all of these modalities is really different.
To add to that, to something that I think is very important is, I had a conversation with a friend many years ago and said, oh, no, don't start writing it down. Think it through before you write it down. And that was my realization, as many others have had, that writing is thinking. Because when you write it down, you have something to hold on to, like the experiment with think of a lion on top of a car. It's not that hard to do. And the question is, what kind of car is it? How many paws are up in the air? Every time you ask a question, you have to realize it more. Human imagination is incredibly flexible, but also insanely vague, which it has to be. So I think the importance of writing something down, and this is why I developed a map for author. I write such as a thing, and I define it in a simple sentence like, hang on, how does that relate to that? And then we start building it. So I think writing is let me just think this through. We have an illusion of depth of thinking, but it's really, really shallow. Writing is a way to illuminate our shallowness, to help us add depth to what we think. Like any teacher would say to the students, if they have a great idea, write it down. Because the act of writing it down shows what's missing. And it can show contradiction. So,
well, I think that's perhaps entirely wrong.
Oh, great. Okay, Mark, I hope you don't mind waiting for this.
One of the reasons I really love talking to Frode is because he's really image-based. He's really a visual thinker. And I'm absolutely a language thinker. And one of the great differences is essentially has to do with the issue of linearization. Okay, that when you're a language thinker, things are basically going in a linear order. And when you basically are an image thinker, you have a much more holistic kind of idea. Now, the idea, for example, of imagine a elephant on top of a car. Under no circumstances would I ever wonder what kind of car it is. Or would I wonder how many, if it has a tail or if it's whatever. Because for me, the words, that's just it. Okay. I don't need that or go there. So one of the things that happens when I write, okay, is that things get simpler. They don't get more complex. And so I think, again, this very big difference in how people's minds work is totally critical. And for example, what kind of affordances we want, what kind of machines we want, what kinds of aids we want, tremendously in these terms. So I'm not going to keep beating that horse. I've just put it out there as saying perhaps it's something to keep in consideration.
Thank you. Mark, you go ahead, but Fabienne, first of all, you got a haircut, don't you?
I did.
You're getting fashionable for your trip to London.
Exactly. Really.
We're just talking now, we started talking about kind of the tone of the community, how we want that to be. And now we're talking a bit about the difference between speech and writing. and Livy and I was just completely disagreeing, and now Mark is ready to go. Disagreeing in an
Well,
interesting way.
It's interesting, and I sort of, I can add to that plot of differences in that I'm definitely an analytical thinker, but not a visual thinker. And I think that probably stems from the fact that I have to do a lot in here because I'm wildly dyspraxic. The number of times I've tried to learn to touch type are many, and they've all failed. And I've gone to the point where I've just stopped trying now because I know that I'm trying to force the engine to do the wrong thing. An interesting observation, listening to your comment about assemblage of words or moving from here to a text, is I actually find things become almost more complicated, because in my attempt to capture the richness in here, the central narrative braid of it is there, but on reflection, my tendency is to tie off all the ambiguities that I see and enjoy on probably the false presumption that somebody else even knows that those ambiguities, those edges even exist. So that's fessing up to one of my many failures, but it shows the complexity of communication. I was interested actually when Fred was speaking just now, and sort of talking about some of the things he was playing around with to try and make bits of text more amenable. And I did something recently where I similar thing, but for other people, for the readers of some stuff I write, that's, I guess you might write broadly as documentation, but as it's about a tool for thought, it's not quite a manual. It's basically trying to tell someone, here are all the bits in the erector set, these are the kind of things you can do with them. And I following up, actually it was Marius who was at Hypertext, who's been around Hypertext 6 years, said, he said, I tried it in Polish using the Google Translate that I'd sort of attached to everything. And he said, it's absolutely meaningless because it has no concept to when it needs to switch from one language to another. So something that effectively you might say is a football term or a term of art doesn't want to be literally translated. And it turns out that marking that up is insanely hard. And even if you do it, I guess because the people who write this never use it, then actually what happens is all the visual formatting falls apart. So all the words smush together because no one's bothered to look at the HTML that the output of the system. Which has been another real interesting reflection for me, because we often talk about wanting to achieve clarity, and so many of these things actually do almost the opposite. Not out of intent, but I think by not thinking through to the point of delivery. And so this is something that sort of enters into my sort of daily work a lot, is in terms of writing small w, communicating for others, where the sort of the quality judgment is not whether I like the thing I wrote, but whether somebody was basically confused when they read it and could they do something with it. Which is why I always rankle slightly that it's very much spirit of the age that everything would be better understood if only we explained it better, which is normally us just hammering harder on what we like and not listening to people say, I don't understand, which they often stress as I don't agree, but they're just saying, I don't really understand. You haven't actually explained something in a manner that I can engage with. Thought.
So that brings up something really, really nice. A couple of things. First of all, Fabienne keeps banging on about coding. And I think the language you just used now, Mark, is very instructive, because I don't think that's what Fabienne is really pushing. He's pushing, as he said, control, end user control. And that can be in many ways. So as you're talking about that kind of tool for thought, Mark, how do you teach someone how to use a screwdriver? Right, you can teach them it goes in a circle, but then sometimes you just want to stab something with it, etc. It is a real challenge. And to learn how to use something like Final Cut really well, for instance, I think gets to that level. So I think we are talking about similar things, but different degrees of abstraction. If you really want to code the machine at the lowest level, which of course in AR, VR, we have to do in some cases, in other cases we don't. But I just wanted to show you guys a color test because of what we're talking about. And I think this is something that especially Peter would agree with. This is something I'm going to show on Wednesday. But So this to me, I just took a screenshot while working, and to me, this is hell. You know, I'm kind of the text guy, but this is just absolute hell. So what I needed to help my brain, and it's very, very strange with context. When I'm sitting talking to Dave Miller, my advisor, suddenly it makes sense. You know, having that social interaction, it opens it up. But I'm sitting here by myself. So one of the things that Mark and I worked on a while ago is highlighting in author is really subtle. I made it even more subtle here as a test. I don't know if your screens are big enough, but can you see I've done a few highlights? So it's just kind of, the idea is that imagine if it was paper and you just put some tape on top of it, you know, not a lot. So we have a command in author already that fades everything that is not a title, a heading, or bold. That's what it does. So all I've been playing with this weekend is if I can highlight these bits, and it's a bit ugly, and I press a button and it does this. This will be very, very helpful to me. The bit in the paragraph that really says what it is what I see. So if I can toggle this really easily, that might be useful. So this is the kind of, thank you, Rob.
Definitely.
Yeah, so this is
Really
the kind
like it.
Thank you. So this is the kind of introduction, but also even just with color. So, you know, this is author normal, this is author warm, this is dark mode warm, dark mode cold. So I've been thinking of going from the very strong contrast to this, and then also for the light mode to this. It looks almost like a joke, it's almost orange. But what I've been doing is just going through testing again and again and just trying to read the center of the screen to see what is comfortable or not. So there's more, but I'll do that in the proper thing. My point is really just to say, when we talk about text, we are not just talking about a thing. Text, and I think this is maybe the most interesting aspect of text. Text has to be instantiated somehow. There is no such thing as abstract text. It cannot exist. And that's really, really fascinating. Also, Leon and Fabienne particularly, I want to talk to you about the color purple. Because there is something really, really weirdly interesting. The color purple is used in 3 times in life. And I see your hand, Fabienne. I'll give it over to you a second. Number 1, for fashion, especially for a woman. Oh, look at that. Oh, Emily would sometimes wear purple trousers, you know, just to be loud, right? A man would hardly ever do it unless you're doing a themed party. The other 2 areas are fantasy, you know, like online fantasy games. There will be some magic with purple. And finally, in technical environments, you know, like you guys operate in, I have seen. Is there something about the color purple that really appeals to some people and not other people? Or is it that maybe people who aren't as actively interested, not aware, but actively interested, will use it more arbitrarily? What do you think? I was being provocative there. Please don't be mad at me. I will see you tomorrow.
I do have a small hunch, but maybe that's age related. Like when I grew up, I was watching a lot of cartoons, American cartoons, and they were all about the future. And there was a lot of purple, neon, and these kind of colors, and this sort of ingrained sort of feeling like this is going to be the future. And I think, or I noticed that a lot of people of my age, they are sort of they long for this future. And it also even expresses itself in a sort of art style. It's called vaporwave. And this is vaporwave is sort of a, they call it a post-capitalist 80s visual style. So if you enter a vaporwave and you check wallpapers, you see a lot of this purple. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's the best explanation I can give about purple and my age, I guess.
Fabian just put in a link just the second you were saying it, so that's pretty cool. That is really fascinating because there's a side issue that is the human brain reacts differently depending on whether we're under blue light from the sky, because we evolved to be, if we're in the savannah, we have to be aware and look around, something may try to eat us. But then as the light goes warmer, as in redder, our thoughts go more towards quite literally the fire in front of us. So it turns out that the color wavelength of a sunset and burning wood is the same. I did actually measure this. So that it seems that the fact that we started controlling fire may have prolonged the evening time. Do not look around because you need to be around something safe. There's nothing around you. I'm wondering if there's something similar going on with purple. But what you said there is very culturally interesting. Fabian, please, over to you. Sorry about that, on and on.
Just a quick remark, a boring technical one, but I'm not an expert in screens, but I think it roughly went from the oscilloscope, like to measure the current in a circuit, to become not just a signal, but a screen proper. And it was basically the technology behind it was you had a green wave, like neon green, something very flashy. And if you look at a lot of old school video game, like really old school before there were consoles, like the aesthetic is not really a design choice. It's like there was one color and it was green, and the screen was grayish black kind of. But what kept on happening is indeed for like with vaporwave or synthwave or a lot of like echoes from the past. Let's say if you make a new game, you can give it a retro look by having the same aesthetics. So if you want, let's say, Matrix style, you have like a grid in 3D, and it's like bright green. It's the neon green of back in the day of the oscilloscope that became a screen. For the magenta, for the pink, for all this, I'm not sure if it comes from there or if it's like a derivation of neon from, a new potential, because it was then, you just had a couple of colors, literally. But for green, at least, it's a boring technical reason as far as I know.
That's really fascinating. I see in the comments here on historically purple. Yes, in Lebanon, the Phoenicians, because of these little shells, to get purple was really expensive, so that became that. But also, there are many people who are kind of doing folk art and stuff. They love purple as well. Like a lot of glassware will have purple and so on. It's just a very strange thing because people who are into type and design these days, like Keith, who should be here today, hardly ever use purple. So I'm wondering if it's something deep or it's just something cultural, because the way we develop work environments, I mean, I hardly add color to anything because I think it's a really strong thing. You shouldn't just arbitrarily put it in there. But thank you very much for that perspective, guys. That's
for the anecdote in the VR world editor kind of thing I'm building, the title is indeed in like bright magenta or even pink. It's very in your face, basically. It's still hidden. Like if you don't look at it, you don't see it. But it's when you look at it, you cannot not see it. And why I did it is as an echo of synthwave and retrowave, and it's a kind of a reminder of the old days, let's say, when computer graphics started. That was my, let's say, motivation for it. But it's not deeper, let's say, than that.
I just put on a link to the page where these things are now listed. Yours is on the bottom, not for any reason that it should be on the bottom. It was just copied over from our old pages. This is linked to from the event page. That's really interesting that you chose that for that reason. Because, I know that if I'm in a very good mood, I will wear brighter colors to shout. So that, I also think that many designer people may be using more muted colors because it's kind of hiding, which is ridiculous. It's like some of the techies like Steve Jobs who thinks that wearing black is being hidden. It is not. There's no such thing as black in color. you have chosen different levels of gray.
Well, I think one thing I'm having a little trouble with is the word purple. Okay. Because, thinking about the purple at Easter, that's, decorating all the stuff in a Catholic church versus a lot of other types of purple, they have rather different kinds of effects. And one of the things when we were working at Fuji Fuji Xerox was very surprising to us was that at that time the PowerPoint slides that came from Japan were almost all pastels.
Hmm.
Now, these were all men who did them, and they were pastel pink, and they were pastel light green, and they were pastel light purple, and which tends to have me that I tend to feel like these things really are very much cultural and in terms of the stylish at the moment. And the thing about the purple pants, well, one of the things is that very wealthy American men who golf and do that sort of thing tend to wear these ridiculous color pants. They wear bright purple pants. They wear bright green pants. They wear bright yellow pants. No other person who isn't essentially trying to be counter whatever was going to wear those pants. But yeah, so yes, but there it's completely understood and stylish and completely unremarkable. So yeah,
That is, for context, really, really interesting. And also in America, like the SGI Silicon Graphics, that was very purplish and light at times. But I'm wondering, in Edgar School, they have F words. It's not just the one, but words that have very strong meaning. Maybe we have the same with color. You wouldn't use yellow everywhere. Yellow means something quite strong. If someone wears a yellow sweater, they are saying something. Purple sweater, they're saying something. Bright green, they're saying something. Blue, not so much. I wonder if that's something to put into the language here, because we talk about the cultural differences. On the trains in Japan, exits are usually indicated by red, not green. How annoying is that? But it is strong. It is to get your attention. Anyway, that's a huge, long spiral of color. I'm not even sure how we started. I'm sure we'll one day maybe look at the transcript. It is fun though to look at the things in the brain while acknowledging how different we are, which cause things to be perceived or not perceived. To think less and less about us as being objective boxes and to think of us as being biological. Yes, Mark.
I was just going to gently sort of nudge you back to, I think, the starters down this track. It was just because you were talking about the experimenting with color to indicate blocks of text and things, which I think ended up in your very subtle highlighting, because one of the conversations, and again, sort of reflecting on differences, I remember early on in the conversations, I can't read this. There are too many, in a sense of now all I see is colors. I don't see text. And it actually, and thinking back, what I think I was really saying is actually it was destroying my ability to sort of extract and hold that text, which is interesting. It didn't mean it was sort of bad because it's an experiment for a purpose. But anyway, that was sort of in a sense what started us off down the color track. So perhaps you can lead us back there and see where we head off from there again.
Well, actually, I want to show you guys an image because this is so related. This also will be discussed on Wednesday, but some of you will be asleep, hopefully. So, the graph thing that we discussed many times on how it easily gets messy. One of the problems I hope we will have soon is when we start nesting graphs, especially we have an absolute massive wall worth of graphs. How can you make it clear that something here is containing more. And I really don't like the idea of icons because they become just messy nonsense. As probably most of you know, in the system that I happen to use, italic means person because it looks like a signature. Bold means location because it's big. Bold italic means institution. Nothing else has any visual. But if we do this, well, first of all, that's just making it nicer, but let me zoom in here. How about doing something as simple as having heart brackets on either side? Lydia is not so sure about this. I showed her earlier, but I'm highlighting it not because it's a color thing, but because it's really interesting for us as a community to start considering a little bit of visual conventions. You know, we're not going to do a Ben Schneiderman and invent the blue underline link again, but maybe there are things we will need to do for this level of interaction. Yeah, Mark, please.
Well, and I just,
let's
I've
just-
spoken a bit, but yeah.
Hold your thought. I'm just going to
Yep.
intro Brandel. Hi, Brandel. Morning. We talked about lots of fun things. Talked about color for a while, difference between speech and writing, and now we're on how to indicate things on a graph. For instance, how to indicate that an item on a graph has more stuff behind it, like nested. Mark, please go ahead.
I was just thinking that I'm wondering if it's with good intent when it ends up in the wrong place, because at some point you've got to choose something, and the issue is perhaps less what it is than how discoverable it is and how much resonance it has for the widest audience. So I might mark something up in a particular way, and I might be able to explain that's what I mean by it. But for a lot, it might be that through, you know, just because sort of Murphy's law, that actually I chose something that for a lot of the audience just has no resonance. So when I tell them what it is, they know what it is, but they have to work quite hard to learn that, to hold on to that linkage, because it just doesn't seem natural to them.
Yeah.
So it loops around in a sense to partly. I think it's about discoverability. So I think sometimes we unintentionally get too lost in it from a design perspective rather than thinking about the communication perspective. So what do we want to communicate here? And how is it most easily done, rather than thinking what would look aesthetically nice and clear and unambiguous. And I'm not suggesting you have an answer to that. I'm just making that observation.
You're
Okay.
just being provocative because sorry, Leon, just really briefly, when trying to approach this, that is indeed what the visual interpretation that I am trying to work on. That is that stuff. It's not just whether it's pretty and any. Okay, Leon.
Yeah, I was so one alternative is perhaps a slash, because it might be or perhaps configurable. I don't know. It might be relatable for people who are used to directory structures. There's always something like a slash which separates it. On the other hand, I'm a bit on the fence where because of this nesting stuff, because my experiences with this, like making a nested graph editor, is that it sort of opens up a can of worms, which is very hard to predict. So yeah, I definitely I have had some experience with it, but I sort of gave up on it because you might run into situations where you want to nest something from outside, from an outside graph, a parent graph, to an inside graph, and then you're realizing that, oh, but wait, these other things in the inside graph, the nested graph, they have nothing to do with what I'm about to link. So you get, yeah, I find it a very hard problem, and perhaps not every brain is made for thinking in nested graphs.
I'm wondering if there's not a difference, though, between the kinds of complex mathematical nesting that one gets and the kind of conceptual nesting that we're thinking about in text. I think they're actually very different.
So
the mathematical, sorry, the mathematical and
when you're talking about graphs as mathematical objects, as programming objects, and so on.
Uh-huh.
There's a certain kind of complexity to those kinds of graphs and how you're actually thinking about the nodes and how you're actually thinking about the links and how you're actually thinking about how you're going to be able to navigate them and so on. And I think that the kind of conceptual object kinds of forget objects because it sounds like programming, conceptual kinds of entities here that one is talking about in text are often quite different. What I am wondering though is whether maybe probably one of the problems or maybe one of the solutions is to move from a strictly 2D notion to a more 3D notion, where the idea of depth could be realized more easily than with just something somewhat similar, like a slash, and also slashes and backslashes are not really very familiar to most people who are outside of the.
Well, if you type the URL, you would have.
Yes, you type a URL, but that's not part. That's just a URL. That's how you do that.
No, that's
yeah.
a fair point.
It's not something that's really just sort of deep in your gut about how you distinguish things.
It is a problem I think we need to solve though, because at some point with XR, you are going to have stuff on many walls in your home. And some of those things will be overviews and some of them will show more. I can imagine always having, here, the basic stuff that then I click through. So in a sense, they are links, of course, as you said.
Yeah, they're links.
So, we will have to reinvent the web, so to speak, in terms of a back button or equivalent. And we will have hypertext issues that have been discussed a lot in the community of getting lost and all of that kind of stuff. Absolutely. Mark says, does nesting need to be always visible hinted? Yes. Discoverability, yes. Why don't you hold on for that for a second? I'm going to give the mic over to Fabienne. That's a good point, Mark. And Mark does have an extremely deep knowledge of this history.
It's anecdotal again, but one of the most, I don't want to say productive or creative, so I'll just say fun time I had with graph. First, it's always very short. Like, I don't know, when we look at science fiction and whatnot, it's like people navigate, manipulate graph, etc. And I would say when I study a problem where the structure of the information doesn't have a simpler representation than a graph, then I will do it, and honestly, happily. But it's usually done, for a very, very short amount of time, let's say in the project, maybe 1% or less. It's still valuable. Otherwise, hopefully I wouldn't do it. But a lot of it is also I have to explore the graph themselves. And that means like in-depth knowledge of the tools to explore graph, to go from node to node or to find, let's say, properties in the graph. So I think it basically navigating graph, I think requires a lot of training or a lot of expertise. You might be lucky and find some structure otherwise, but I think it's a bit like massaging the graph, for lack of a better term. I think requires quite a bit of investment overall. Like not displaying a graph alone, I don't think is in most cases sufficient. So I think it's definitely a valuable process. But I would tend to think it's quite demanding, and it usually doesn't match what we see, what we imagine in science fiction of like spending vast amount of time in it. It's more like very short amount of time looking at the actual thing and a lot of time to make it work. And then, I don't know, like remove a bunch of nodes because it's just not visible or understandable, I guess. At least that's my experience with it.
Leading into Mark's longer perspective on this, and also Peter, one thing we found in the studies of this stuff here is that you tend to, at least in our world, use the map in the beginning of a project, in the beginning of writing something, because you're literally mapping it out. and then you will refer to it in shorter sessions later on. Maps are, I think, tools for thought, and this is something that comes out in Mark and Dave's paper. They're not good for presentation. You got to make your own mess. So when you know roughly where things are and you know what that column means, that's a very different thing than presenting it for someone else to learn about that space, unless it's very, very defined. And then finally, before I hand the mic over, one thing I've really found with the map in Author is the importance to be able to get rid of stuff. You mentioned that, Fabian. I think it's so important to hide stuff, to get rid of stuff, to simplify stuff. And that's why I think the nesting is so important. The nesting may not be a link to somewhere else. It may be a view of the same data. But now I'm looking at this aspect. And this aspect may be defined by nodes or attributes or something else. And if we don't look at this kind of higher dimensional, in terms of how we define it, ways of defining our workspace, I think we're going to make messes and get lost. So Fabian, in general, I agree very much with what you said. I guess Peter and then Mark. Mark, you're all ready to comment on this, right? Okay, so Peter, since you have your hand up.
Okay, I'd like to call your attention to work done at the University of Maryland's Human Computer Interaction Lab circa early 1990s. They were using Java-based systems with zoomable user interfaces, and they had a presentation tool they developed where it would depend mostly on a semantic zoom. So as you zoomed in on a node, additional subgraphs would then fade in. So sort of keyed to your proximity. As you got closer to the main node, the opacity of the subgraph would increase until it was full. Then you could shift over and zoom in on that. And again, as you got closer, additional subsections of the overall graph would become big enough to fade into view. So instead of trying to display everything simultaneously, you only had the most important topical nodes at first, and you shift from topic to topic. And as you did, it'd sort of be a crossfade into the new slide perspective. I don't know whether any of that stuff's floating around on YouTube, but somewhere out there, there might be some recorded presentations of them using that back at the time. Then once Java fell out of favor and the graduate students who built those systems moved on, I think they lost the ability to access that old code base, and that technology sort of fell by the wayside. But it might be worth revisiting it.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
A quick remark, it's when you mentioned also, Frode, before the exploration versus presentation or showcasing, I think it reminds me a lot of also, let's say if I make a sketch on a Remarkable or wherever, well, on a whiteboard, and it's finished and I show it to you, and if I worked on it, let's say for half an hour because I'm solving the problem or trying to, it's impossible to understand. But if I do it step by step, if we we replay basically together, there is a kind of story of how it unfolds. I find it a lot more digestible. And I'm wondering if it's the same, like you work on a graph, you see what makes sense, what doesn't. And then when you have the final result, you cannot just shove it in the face of the person who would have to understand, because they wouldn't have had the process that led to that view.
Yeah, that really echoes what Bill Buxton has said about drawing maps, and some of the earlier things that he was doing on the concept of Microsoft Surface was that maps, physically drawing a map and having the physical draw out of a map is a really useful construction of a narrative. You know, we have this convention with writing that we read it from top to bottom. So the fact that it all exists at once is not super confusing to us, because we have a sort of a known and objective order that we all follow in order to be able to make sure that we sort of examine and attend to all of the pieces eventually. That's not the case with a physical map, or sort of a geospatial map, where there's not a reading order that's kind of specified by any convention, or for the most part by even explicitly in the context of the map. You just say, "Behold," and expect everybody to be impressed. So having the ability to kind of progressively construct something, I think, is very valuable.
Absolutely, because in a physical map, there is a reading order, because you know what's up, what's down, what's water. So you read either where you're going, or you can, there is a landscape, so to speak. With text, there is no inherent landscape. But just on the chart thing on the map thing, if you don't mind, since we have Brandel here and Brandel's not coming to London this time. Here are questions for you, Brandel, okay? I wonder if you have any clue what I'm going to ask you. Yeah, you can all see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Right.
No, no.
So obviously, Reader will go into Vision. Here's a mock-up of the icon. Let's pretend we click on it. This is probably relatively automatic, or is it? Would it have to be in a landscape orientation window to show one document? Is that the deep? I've been looking a lot at the Vision documentation. What do you think, Brandel? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, that's pretty easy. And I think you should be able to specify whatever aspect ratio. If you look at Israel's video, designing for spatial interaction, or designing for spatial, it's design
So
for
the-
spatial interaction, I think is what it's called.
So this
then
would
you can see
basically
this
be
sort of
iPad view, right, so to speak.
Yeah, and in fact, I can probably it's opt out. The Vision OS App Store, so that Reader's probably already on my is probably already downloadable on my Vision Pro.
It is on iOS. There are some issues, as there always is, but it is there. But so for the community to ask you, here's the next question. Would I have to develop a full environment? To what degree do I have to do something like a huge graph against my wall, or multiple pages, or something like this where I'm using multiple things in multiple places? This is probably an environment, right?
No, an environment is just the space that you're in. You're probably what you're probably talking about is a full space app or a full space mode to an app. You can actually do that within a single app, is to be able to alternate between a shared space and a full space app. It's just that there's this kind of modality, like modalness, that you can engage that forces other things to temporarily background. So tab overview in Safari is one such place, and being able to take a photo in the Photos app full screen. Those are things that are in the keynote. So yeah, you'd have the ability to have multiple panels in a shared space, but you can also have a full space where you have the ability to construct things like that. It would need to be, written in the windowing environment in order for it to be able to kind of live alongside those things. But you'd be able to transition seamlessly between sort of delineating this much space, this much space, and everything as being under your domain.
So this would require a normal iOS level developer to learn a little bit about Vision to do.
That's the hope. Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to be talking about this.
But if you,
so yeah, thank you.
If you really should. There are demos that you can do in London. You should talk to your developer relations source and see if you can get into one of those demos, because given that you have an app, given that you have an explicit interest and a goal for what you can do, you should qualify to be able to kind of be part of the program for people to be supported in understanding what they can do in and for Vision OS.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the plan. But it was only last week that this went live. So, one step at a time. But that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I do look forward to hearing from you, Brandel. Once you have had Reader in he has the headset, by the way. He had it for 3 years without telling us, Monster Man. Telling me what it feels like now, that would be, of course, interesting to hear, because it's the most basic thing you could ever imagine. I mean, it was Fabian who started putting some of our PDFs into the Mozilla spaces, and that was shockingly not bad. So when people say people aren't going to read with a headset, I think they are wrong, but it won't be all day.
Yeah. So another thing that I thought while folks were talking about nesting is that there's an interesting challenge in the integrity of the recognizability of an entity as itself when it is sort of transcluded or scaled or kind of transmogrified. And I think that there's some really interesting and valuable tensions to consider between the modifiability of the appearance of something and and its sort of intrinsic recognizability as that thing. And I think that they become quite a distinct concern within a 3D and stereoscopic environment, because we have such most of us in infancy developed a pretty strong sense of object permanence. And object permanence says this thing is always the same, unless, and if it looks different, it's probably because it's just looking different, and it is the same. It's the same size, it's the same shape. And so when we kind of have a special category of modifiable or malleable things. Sometimes it's because they're just floppy, but most of the time it's because they're entities, or they're agents, and they have agency is the reason why they change. And so I'd be intrigued as to how sort of mutually sort of legible and recognizable entities are as they're sort of transcluded between different networks, depending on the different views of them, whether people can go, oh, this is that, it's this shape and this size, and then modify them that way. Because I think that there are some, it's not correct, but people talk about lizard brain sort of low-level recognizabilities and things like that of various features. And it's neat to be able to go, this is my cup, my teacup. It's no matter where it is, no matter what else it's around, no matter what kind of lighting environment. So I'd be really interested in how much we desire to push that and change it, and how much we need to kind of retain the same state and the appearance of a given representation of a piece of information in the graph by virtue of trying to trigger that.
That's so crucially important. How far can you stretch it? And this is why in Author, whatever font you've chosen for heading, when you fold the document to see only the headings, it's the same font. It has to feel like a sculpture that you're interacting with. I think it's very off-putting when you have a menu to the left of a document that is a very different font than the menu. What does it relate to? So, and that's also why I think it would be really interesting for us to discuss what the thing is, a link in a thing to load another thing. Edgar, come say, sorry, Edgar has to say hi to Olivia, hasn't seen her for years. And everyone else. Edgar, say hi to everyone.
Hi.
As you might be able to tell, he had a sports day today. Did you do football or
Games.
games? Excellent. So we're in the middle.
Chess.
You did chess as well. Boy, he's trying to teach his parents chess and failing miserably. So we were talking. Have you had a haircut today? You look like it. Are you sure you didn't sneak one on the way? Fabienne had a haircut. Right. Okay. Well, sorry guys. Yes. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Mark, I really think you have thoughts on this because you've looked so much of the history of this kind of hypertext, spatial hypertext, different kinds of linking.
Well, skirting around the difficult problem, in a sense, once it's all digital, everything is metadata. But I think there's it's the horror at the middle of the current project I'm involved in, that everyone wants to do really interesting querying. The one thing they don't want to do is have any hand in generating the non-existent metadata on which the whole ability to do that hinges. So all this, and I think this speaks to the problem of, we were talking earlier about shifting from your sort of personal knowledge discovery graph to something that you actually want to communicate to something else. We're quite happy to just have the blue things in one corner and the red things in another. And we don't really care that that's all the structure there is. But if I want to communicate that to you, I probably need to explain that these are indeed different things and they're deliberately not put close together. And all that somehow has to be captured if we want to do things with it. And the point I made earlier about, do we actually want to always see the sense of nesting or indeed just more content, is that sometimes no, we definitely don't. It's more that having a way to indicate, well, and also there's a difference between sort of more content and just how far that nesting goes. Nesting is actually very graph orientated and in a sense rather mechanical. Sometimes what you're trying to say is this a bigger thing? Is this a bigger idea than that? And it's nothing to do with how much text there is written about it or how many references it has or all the countable things that we reach for when we want to try and put an edge to things, because counting the countable is easy, basically. But there are these more abstract things that we play with quite nicely. And in this sort of loose domain, in this mapping, the maps we have at the moment in 2-dimension, which I think offer more that we can do when we have a sort of VR or AR space, is there's still this problem about how you capture and manipulate those things, because you also have links that are sort of, in a sense, explicit. So that might be a keyword, or you're linking in some way between things. And the others, which are much looser, it's almost like an affinity thing. I always sort of think of it in terms of something like a jigsaw or a box of Legos or something. You know, you sort the things in different colors. That's kind of like a first stage, because, you know, going back to Brandon's point about permanence, we know that the yellow things are not the same as the green things. It doesn't really matter if we don't know why they're like that, but we definitely know they're different. And maybe to see the wood for the trees, it helps to maybe to just put the blue things and the green things, or the white things and the green things, whatever, you know, in different piles. And I often find, again, another interesting aspect of maps is I like to think as the dark knowledge, you know, just as we talk about dark matter, so keeping things apart, there are spaces in there. And I'm often thinking, when I'm using sort of maps for exploration ideas, saying, okay, so why is there a gap here? Because, you know, this and this thing definitely have some distance to them, and there seem that which implies that almost there's some bridging notion. There's something I don't yet know, the unknown, if you're going for the Johari window approach. But I think that holds some water. But capturing these things into affordances that you can, you know, sort of click on and make things happen is remarkably hard. But I think that comes back to the fact that we probably unintentionally, in a utilitarian thing, we've got a graph, I can use it for everything. And I think graphs, maps, call them what you will, have a very different resonance and use for us on almost like a personal or small or a small group discovery. You know, if you're all basically sitting in the same conversation, as it were, that loose edge graph can probably work. But when you step across, you say, right, I'm now going to sort of put it online for anyone to look at, or I'm going to show it to a room full of people. That's you lose that, and as you know, indeed, as Fabienne has already picked up on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the great things about the paper you wrote with Dave Miller. Hypertext for thinking as a tool for thought and hypertext for presentation are very different. That was a hugely liberating insight for me with my work. I mean, an author, when I export to PDF, it's no longer a map, it's a glossary. It's a connected glossary, but it fits the reading model, at least at this point. Could we do better? Of course we absolutely could. But at some point, I mean, the Meta presentation the other day was quite fascinating. You know, I was wondering about desk accessories in VR. And I was going to talk to you about that, Brandel. So Meta now calls them augmentations, which is an interesting choice of words. So in your default space, you can have a this and a that. You know, that's super cool. At some point, there's no question in my mind, we're going to have a murder wall or a graph or whatever we choose to call it on a overlaid a physical wall in our office. And that thing will have to be a direction for more stuff. So that's what I mean about just, you know, linking it. It will happen. Will it happen in a cheesy way or in a deep way? That's a little bit up to us.
I'll drop in one other.
The dark knowledge. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Just very, very, very quickly. It's just that one other thing is the sense that actually using the same tool or the same affordance for dramatically different things. You know, trying to work out a problem space versus just writing, you know, your grocery to-do list. And I just see this happening all the time. So we pick the things in front of us and we use it, and it doesn't help us because we just make a simple task hard. You know, actually using, say, a 3D map is probably not a good place to write a to-do list. You could, or you might map out a task. But anyway, back to Brandon.
Yes, and I use I use Adobe Illustrator for far too much, simply because I'm so familiar with it that it's just the most ready to hand thing. It annoys a lot of people knowing because they're like, but this is a slideshow. Why is it in Illustrator? Anyway, so but that sort of speaks to the concept of the dark knowledge that sort of characterizes aspects of the information you want to encode within a map, within a representation of some kind of set of information or relationships and things like that. Also reminds me about the hard cut that Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator have around what information is encoded in documents and what is understood to be sort of relevant. So you have a really great, modern computers have lots of RAM. They have the ability to have an incredible undo queue, but they don't have in them they might set what the active tool was, but it's likely that it's only if you engaged in some action with the active tool. So that if you zoomed, specifically if you used a line, you drew a line or you wrote some text and things like that, then it may sort of cycle back and forth through those active tools implicitly on the basis of that. But it doesn't encode, I'm pretty sure, if you didn't do anything with them. It also doesn't encode if you simply zoomed in or out or focused on a different thing. And there are such an array of critical epistemic actions that we undertake when we're constructing something and when we're navigating things. And it's always really difficult for people to decide the level, to the extent that there are sort of layers or other representations that exist within a given document or presentation or some mixture thereof, for people to decide at what level is this thing to at what level does this thing exist in the sort of lexicon of all of the different ways that we can encode these things. So you can have a sticky note, but it could be just a layer in Photoshop that people have by conventions to say that this isn't the document, this is just information about the document. And likewise, so I'm doing presentations actually at Apple for the public event soon, and that's very exciting. And but the conventions that they have there are that you just put things in that look gross, and then everybody knows that that's definitely a message to each other as you're sort of engaging in this interaction about the presentation. And yeah, it's tricky because I think most people really lowball how much, like, underestimate the quantity of sidecar information that would be relevant to be able to encode, and that underestimation is baked into the majority of most of our tools. It's been really fascinating to see Autodesk, the company that makes Maya and AutoCAD and things like that, actually play with Blender because it's simply an easier code base to manipulate, and think about how help and communication about a tool could be baked into the tool itself, and to be able to make it so that the help is the tool, and instead of having to go to some kind of smart page documentation, for it to be there and to be related to it. And I think that there's a whole slew of discoveries to be made about how people's use of a tool in itself can be used to communicate about the domain, about the tool, and about the content. And unfortunately, it would probably mean encoding a much richer thing, much richer undo queues and other aspects like that within the context of your own apps, like Reader and Author. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Also, to that end, something that I would love to push on within big companies like Apple and Google about, like, if this were to become a more prevailing view of what apps are and are for, how can the lower level systems support them for it? So, not saying that you should do all of the difficult work just on your end, but just like, how can we convert people's understandings of tool uses into maybe slightly more demonstrative tool uses, and what happens to the process of saving, loading, understanding sort of the state of things as a consequence of trying to foreground that as a genuine, like, valuable thing to be able to kind of ascertain. It also reminds me of all the AI stuff and the way that so much AI work is trained on totally finished work rather than the process whereby work comes about. And you don't learn nearly as much about that because when you're building something that you know enough about the sort of mechanical steps of being able to kind of progress it through those stages, you can actually work with something that looks like total garbage. That goes for text, that goes for pictures, that goes for sculpture, that goes for all kinds of things, where it's just like, this is junk. And then somebody flips a switch and you're like, oh, somebody drew the rest of the owl. And in the context of AI, when you don't have those intermediate steps encoded, then everybody is just kind of trading in these weird, busted, but nevertheless sort of nominally finished works that don't reflect anybody's workflow. And that's, you know, the thing that I hate about AI, other than, you know, the ecological disaster aspect. But yeah, so like, I think back to that process, being able to foreground and recognize that process is going to be especially important, and being able to take people through process by way of having those layers of encodability and retaining information about how we got here is going to be a pretty important thing for apps in the future.
I'm going to show you something really cool. Are you all ready for this? Yeah. Okay. So this is my mess, right? This is not presentation. This is that whole thing about tools for thought, tools for presentation. So Livia's in my physical office now. And the only thing that she needs to understand are pictures on the wall and maybe my bookshelf. So I think that is so incredibly important that I know that this tiny little thing, I open that, I have access to such stuff, and here I have other such stuff. Right? And I still think that this conversation has been immensely thought-provoking, at least for me, because when we're talking about putting up stuff on a wall in our room, in our headsets, we are talking, it could be anything. It could even be little icons of animals or whatever we might want it to be. Because all it is portals to quote unquote proper maps for ourselves. You know, we're not going to need to look up constantly to learn a thing. You know, that's in the beginning of a project. But for instance, when I have a meeting with you guys, you know, maybe in a shared space soon, we'll have some kind of things we're discussing for a seminar or something. Yes. But we still need to define some convention for how that works. Need would be interesting, may or may not be useful. And then maybe even how to collapse it and package it and, you know, share it with the rest of you if there is a need for that, fully knowing it's someone's mess. And then maybe we have a very interesting challenge is how do you unfold someone else's mess? Can there be enough encoded that it'll, to a degree, fit what you have? And with that, Fabian opens the window. And opens the world, quite literally. I like that. That was poetic.
Oh, so it's not going to help, but I have to share this. Maybe it will. It's so this weekend I gave a workshop to kids in Challenge School in Brussels for them to not learn about VR, not learn about programming, but that if they do learn programming, they're going to program all the computers around them, from IoT, the light, or whatever. I mean, you know the thing, including VR headset, because I brought some. And to, let's say, prove the point, what I did was they all tried the headset, they had a lot of fun, blah, blah, blah. But at some point, what I wanted to show is I changed the color of the sky in the VR headset, and then the sky changes color from blue to whatever color they wanted.
Purple?
They always wanted red. They wanted red, actually. I don't know why, but that was intense. But I did that. And then an hour or two after, actually in the afternoon, they wrote a little postcard to say thank you, blah, blah, blah. And they wrote down that you teach us to change the color of the sky. But they didn't write VR on the card. So that was like a kind of a mindfuck, but in a very, very poetic way. So yeah, some kids now in Brussels think they can change the color of the sky by programming. So I think that was cute.
I think that's very beautiful. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's probably going to be the title of your first book. It's it's kind of annoying with this symposium coming up now, because what I look mostly forward to is the chat. You know, particularly, I hope if it's not raining, some of us, particularly, believe it or not, Leon, Fabian, and Mark, and Livia and me sitting around the fireplace outside here talking about stuff we wish you guys were a part of. Because these chats like today, you know, it's good stuff. I do think that we need to keep up this fun, but also we should slowly try to get a little bit better at the documentation side. You know, especially for Alan and Brandel, because you say the most brilliant things, and it's like, you know, where do we put that in an article? And I think that meta question is, how can we do that, is really an interesting thing for us to look at over time. You know, how can we go back to the transcript and look at the bits that Brandel talked about just now and make it findable by other people? That's an important thing.
So I this morning doing my, was it yesterday? No, this morning I went around the park with a friend and I did the promotion basically of the group and the symposium. He's working on machine learning. He's been working on AI for, I don't know, 10 years or more. He has a postdoc in this domain, and he's a nice guy. But I wanted to give him a honest view on the group. And I also mentioned, I don't know, dozens, hundreds, maybe even of video available with potential transcript. So I'm curious to see how he's going to look at it, either by directly looking at the video or doing some text analysis of the transcript, or just little peek here or there. And hopefully his interest will be piqued enough in order to maybe provide some kind of path to a solution for this. Who knows?
That's very interesting to have a new person being spied upon by us to see how they choose to integrate or not. That's really cool. Thanks, Fabian.
Hi, Yanel, if you watch this video.
Oh, yes. Hello. I'm glad you finally reached this video. Mark.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as you talk about this, and how we encode things, I think one thing, and I'll count myself guilty amongst others that I'm here to judge, is that I think too readily do we reach for a sort of a nice finished structure. The thing we should be asking ourselves is, okay, so what are the questions we're trying to ask? Because I'm rather on the same bus as Brandel when it comes to AI. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. It does lots of good stuff, but for me, not much useful at the moment, mainly because it's actually working on finished objects. So it's fine if you want to know where the nearest restaurant is or something, not so much use if you're trying to understand less structured things and indeed unfinished things. And one of the terms I'm pushing into my work at the moment to sort of might push back against the people who just give up and say, well, it's all metadata, is I call it meaningful metadata. So you can count as much stuff as you like. It's not really meaningful, because all that generally does is find the stuff you knew that was in there in the first place. And I don't think that's that's not a big win these days. We sort of know how to do that already, and we can do it at scale, but it doesn't make it very exciting because we knew it was there. It's the stuff that we know is there that we can't find. And we don't have particularly good affordances for that. And at the moment, I don't think, well, the trouble is everyone's lost their collective whatnot. No, the answer to everything is AI, to which I would only say no. It's the wrong use of the term. It's like saying things like blockchain or something. It doesn't change the price of fish. It just means you're not engaging in the debate. So actually having meaningful metadata. So what are the things that allow us to do the powerful transformations we want? And I don't claim to know the answer. And I'm not even saying that calling it meaningful metadata is a help in itself. I'm just trying to tease apart that fact that there are things that I don't think we're producing at the moment that have a strong influence on our ability to use these new tools. For the very reason, actually, as Brandel mentioned, is that how does this feed down? How does this feed down into the people who actually have to go make a tool? So it's one thing to envision it. The next thing is to actually make something that encapsulates that vision in a meaningful sense in an environment, especially if it's an environment that's totally constructed. So I'm not suggesting this is minor, but I'm more a thinker than a maker, and I don't mean that in any pretentious way, but I'm more that I'm really bad at making things. But yes, so finding perhaps one of the ways into this is to ask more questions about, okay, well, what are the things I sort of think I need to be able to do? It's really interesting you just mentioned about, say, unpacking somebody else's sort of creation process. So a really interesting challenge there is, how do you walk through that without basically destroying the thing? In other words, in the act of taking it apart, can you sort of come out the other end and put it back together and leave it as it was? Or, you know, with the state of the tools we have at the moment, would you inexorably change that, which meant that the next person who wanted to come and look at that thing, that artifact, that experience, couldn't do so because, in fact, your footprints were all over the top of it? Not intentionally, but just because we haven't considered how we might want to interrogate and hold things in a sort of soft and non-crushing way.
Good questions. Peter?
Yeah, I think what I really need is a lightweight, low overhead tool to be adding that metadata while I'm going through things. Something that would be sort of a universal affordance that would be available in whatever app I'm using, that would just allow me to have sort of a standoff markup kind of a system where it wouldn't necessarily be a part of the file of that app, but independent. It would capture what the current app is that I'm working in and give me some sort of a little palette or something where I just really fast click to provide context for what it is that I'm looking at now so that I can find it later on. And at the moment, every system has its own little tagging protocol, and we don't have a universal tagging, and we don't have a grammar to relate the tags to each other. And I think that would make it much more powerful. So in the moment, it's just sort of like a little word soup associated with things inside of each individual program. And we need a system level affordance that's very painless, low cognitive overhead to be using so that we can keep track of that context as we're doing things to be able to retrieve it that way.
That sounds very, very useful. I'm thinking how I could approach part of that in Liquid, of course. But one thing we've talked about for, what, 2 years now is having a better transcript service. You know, I do transcribe our main talks. I can't do every single one. It's just too much because it doesn't remember the people's names from time to time. I have asked them to do that. You know, to have to even label and make sure they fit, that's a chore. But you know, if we maybe had something better live, as we've talked about, it would be nice to be able to, you know, quite literally hit the space bar and that marks it as this is something I want to come back to later. I completely agree. One of the things we were planning to do from Reader was select text, do a keyboard shortcuts, and it pastes it in the journal in Author where it came from. We can do that from the web as well. But I think, Peter, you're asking for something important there. Brando, please.
So what you're talking about is in the context of what Frode was talking about is the context of chats and these little windows that we appear in on a weekly basis. And so what I'm talking about doesn't speak to that, but to what the direction I took from what Peter was talking about before that. That's important as well. And I feel like it's a shame that people haven't taken, you know, the cue of things like the basic reality of the green outline around the fact that I'm talking now. I think that appears on the video transcripts as well, on the video logs. That's certainly what I was exploiting as I was trying to come up with a thing of who was talking at what time. The direction I went in from what Peter was talking about in relation to having the ability to kind of encode things intermittently along the process of constructing something and the way that different applications do that in different ways reminds me of Universal Scene Description, the USD format that Apple signed onto, and that was thankfully there's a public alliance that has been established. You know, Apple, NVIDIA, Pixar, Autodesk, Adobe, I think are the founding 5 or so. The CEO of NVIDIA at the most recent SIGGRAPH had a good 10 minutes devoted to OpenUSD, this file format, and it just exists primarily for, you know, computer graphics work, but it's a single file type that like 50 apps read and write now in a way that means that they can manage things. But it occurs to me that given an adequately universal kind of interrupt between those things and an adequately rich spatial gestural sort of lexicon of encodable actions, it could be understood as a much more abstract and generalized sort of repository or a way of thinking about just people's actions within the context of particularly a spatial interface, but any kind of interface. You know, having a sort of an application generic or out of application log or queue of activities as they sort of pertain directly to action within a document or application, so that if you are using Author, while then Author has access to the system level representation of those things in such a way as it could be encoded or could be related. You know, there are all sorts of security models to work out, but just the idea that what happened as well as what resulted are equally important sides of a pretty similar coin, and having sort of an adequately universal basis for that sort of baked into people's operating systems would be a really good place to start looking for kind of reference points for how to understand this shape of the problem.
I think this connects the AI and the metadata thing really, really nicely, because anything can be a really, really cool demo in VR. You know, it's super easy to make. The question is, do you have the data to make it happen? Obviously, I could imagine having a discussion with you guys now in Apple's FaceTime VR environment and saying something like, Siri, note down the last 10 seconds of what Fabienne said. Sorry, or Siri goes off here. But there could be, why should we, let's say that we give all the power to Apple, we're all Apple people, and I will tell this to Bruce Horn, who's again at Apple working on AI, but you know, so far it's an open idea. What if there are differently named AIs in the environment? So Siri is a specific thing for general. What if Apple released an official AI called Livia? Right. So while we're having a meeting, we can literally say, "Oh, Livia, note this down." Right. So Livia knows that it is about the metadata. It is your note-taking assistant. So because you own the computer, you're given it entire context for your entire life. It can read the screen. It can read everything. That could start to become useful. But if you have to do the hey business or even the single name, it can, you know, more assistance for more uses. I know it's anti-Apple because it's more complicated than having one.
Yeah.
But, you know, as an idea, this is an interesting discussion.
Did you watch, did everybody watch Keiichi Matsuda's most recent video about people having little AIs bouncing around, and the conversation between a woman who has a large number of very small fractional AIs and the fellow who has one who does everything for him?
Oh, please.
No, do you have a link?
Yeah, either link or name
I'll
search, please.
Yeah, I'll grab it. So Keiichi Matsuda is the person who, he was one of the main technologists and design directors for Leap Motion, and did Hyper Reality, the 2016 video about a woman kind of being a TaskRabbit person who suffers identity theft, but in this incredibly garish dystopian sort of Mexico City. It's a brilliant piece of work. And yeah, this one is sort of the latest installment of it that sort of had more direct relationship to the video game that he's making. But it's great. And I mean, you would want to think about it, but Matsuda might actually be a pretty interesting person to try to pull into conversations like this at some point. I'm not sure where he's based now, if he's in London again, or if he is back over in the States, but yeah. I'll look for some talks by him as well, because they were really cool when I got to see them in GDC. I'll just grab that link because it's extremely relevant to that question of one versus many.
Yeah, fantastic. And please email or X or whatever as well. That's really, really cool. So tomorrow morning, I'll have to finish my thesis. All these great discussions we have, and then it still comes down to editing to fit in the specific flow. And the last thing in the world I would do is show to Livia, because she would find 10 mistakes for the first word on every page. So that's not going to happen.
Good.
Mark would be the second worst. We're finishing soon. We're going to faster with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So guys, do you want to tell Edgar what kind of future you're going to build for him? What are you doing? What are you
One way you'll have to help build it.
Yeah, that's right. You have to help build it. Oh, Edgar, did you do your poem today? Do you want to do it for everyone now, real quick? Yeah, come and do it here. Edgar, your poem, you're so good at it. I'm sure everybody would like to hear it. Because I've told them all about the poem, but they don't know what it is. I'll give you a cuddle if you do it. I'm not sure if you heard that, but okay, guys, we're just finishing. Edgar, either poem or leave, because we're actually doing work stuff. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Brandel. Yeah, sorry about that.
Liquid City is his company at the moment, and it's for Niantic. Makes sense.
Well,
But
I
yeah,
love the name. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, we'll look at that properly. So, any questions about the week, Wednesday and Thursday? You foreigners, you know it'll be more in time for you on Thursday, right? Though, of course, you're extremely welcome on Wednesday.
What's the final drop
yeah.
dead
No, I'm
date
gonna
for
try
written
to do it.
submissions?
Sorry, Peter, what?
What's the drop dead date for final written submissions for the proceedings?
There's no such thing. I tried again, as I try most years, to get people to do it a week ahead, and maybe one person did. So this time it is all about the social atmosphere. Afterwards, I'll go around in the net and get everyone's contributions. Then we will put it into a shape for the book. But I've decided to extremely devalue that and upvalue the dialogue until next week. Then it'll be all focused on that.
Very good.
And Randall, what did you say also?
Oh, I'm gonna try to join for all of the time. I in order to participate in the TPAC stuff last couple of weeks ago, I got up at 1 a.m. And so I have permission to do that and just not turn up to work on those days.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll probably only be available on the second day.
Okay. And the rest of you will be here. I can't believe it. It's very nerdy cool, and it's all designed to make the rest of you feel excluded. So next year you will come over again. Well, again, you're, Brandel and Peter, first time, I hope. Yeah, so I really appreciate our weekly discussions. I think we have to find some way to get this better, because this is not better than the symposium. Sorry, it is not worse. This is as good as the symposium. It truly is. So how can we make this available? Please think about it, guys. As long as it doesn't require any work from any of you, because no one will do any work. That's it also looks like maybe Elio Soft Space might be coming over, which would be fun.
Oh, great. Yeah.
There's so much
I
I
haven't
don't
seen any of
understand
their
about Soft
updates.
Space. Yeah, but some of his interactions, like the hand to grab the whole room. How brilliant is that? Fabian, Leon, and Mark, you're all bringing headsets, right? Leon, are you traveling with headset? Or are you frozen?
I'm traveling with a headset. I will probably not wear it when I'm on the bus, but yes.
Fair enough. Okay. So just logistically, Mark, you're coming in at 5 tomorrow, aren't you? St. Pancras.
6.
No, sorry. Yeah, you're coming in at 6. Fabienne, you're coming in at 5.
Oh, 4, I think.
I thought so you said 4:55 or something like that. Anyway, we can continue this via email, and then we'll figure out. Hang on, where is? No, actually, we probably should check it now. Yeah, actually, can you check that, Fabian? That would be very useful to know now.
Sure, I'll check.
Okay.
And I mentioned in the chat, I might take my roller skates if the weather is really that good, because for the social aspect, if we run around like physically while chatting, I felt it often tends to interesting discussion. So if somebody would be up for that and the weather is good, I'll be up for a bit of actual run around a park or somewhere.
Very Brandel thing to do. Yeah, I mean, it's a shame you have to leave early on the Thursday because we're planning a walking tour. That's going to be epic. So we'll see how that goes. And Leon, you're checking into the hotel, so you can then come this way tomorrow, right?
Yeah, so as far as I understood, Fabien will be picked up at Saint Pancras or something.
Yeah.
And I could be there at the same time, in theory. Okay, so maybe we can.
So sorry to interrupt you, Fabien. When are you arriving?
So it says 4 p.m. or 3:57.
Oh, okay, so it is 4. Okay, so that changes everything for everyone. That's fine. And so Leon, you can be there at 4, St. Pancras?
Yeah, then I will not check into the hotel yet, but then I will just join you immediately, and then in the evening I will just go to the hotel.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. And then Mark, you will actually you can go to just straight to Wimbledon at any time. We can try to coordinate to meet at the station, but if not, there will be someone at home.
Yeah, I think at the moment I now booked stuff to go up at 6. Because it's the day before. The irony is there's a national rail strike, so it's actually easier to get into the country from anywhere but say the South Coast on Wednesday, which I'm traveling up the night before. But it's also a bit sketchy the day before, day after. So it's probably a matter of it's gonna be one of those days you turn up and get on the train that's there. But a plan at the moment is to arrive in Wimbledon at 6. So now that's not far from you. I can figure out way on from there.
Yeah.
And Frode, you mentioned the tour, but the tour on Thursday is at like 1 or 2 p.m., no?
Yes. I can see if we can do it a little bit earlier because of your.
No, but that should be fine for me because on Thursday I gotta leave at 5 p.m. at the station, so.
Oh, okay.
Should make it.
Yeah, it is. I'll just give you all the link here. It's the same symposium link. Yes. So it's supposed to be 1:30 and 1.5 hours. And then at 4 o'clock, we continue online, which is our normal Monday time.
So that's great for me. Like I can do the tour, and then when maybe I'll start at the station for the online part, have a little break, I guess, when I'm under the ocean, and be back online, and no problem.
Yeah. Typo. Can't have a typo sitting next to Livia. That's just. Okay. Oh no, that's not a typo. There is no AM or PM for 12. So we don't have a running order for Wednesday because I don't know who's speaking. It's been an interesting challenge this time. I don't care. So many people are passionate. So many people will be online. We'll just do it like we do here. Someone put the hand up. They will have 5 minutes. you know, whether in the room or not, so it should be good. Yeah, we'll have a discussion.
Is that the average speaking time per person, 5 minutes or?
Normally, we have 5-minute presentation and 10-minute dialogue, and then we move on.
Okay.
But in the morning, when I get a better sense of how many people there are online who will be talking, we can juggle that a little bit. But also, I'm thinking, since we're bringing headsets, we might as well use them as we did last year. So we probably should put a little bit of time into the schedule for using the headsets. So if anybody who wants to submit a piece on the link I just sent, we have a link to XR experiences, which has some of what we did last year. And I have checked them, they do still work. But if you want to submit something new, that would be really cool. And then we will, maybe what we should do is make that part of lunchtime. So Brandel, since you're the furthest away, when would you like us to be doing VR stuff where you just might as well be asleep?
It doesn't matter too much to me. If you don't have the feed on, I could probably just curl up. There's a sofa bed in the office room that I'll be in. You'll be able to catch winks when they arrive. But I'm happy to, because like I said, I don't have to do work so on a Wednesday. My Thursday has some stuff in it. But yeah, like my Wednesday, I will be able to largely just sleep through everything afterwards. So I don't need to sort of preserve myself at the same time as missing that whole night to sleep.
So I just updated based on that the page, and we have 4 p.m. We're going to have coffee and pastries. I'm just wondering if maybe that's when we should have VR towards the end of the first day, because then Randall can go to sleep. Or if it makes sense to start with that. Leon and Fabian, what do you think?
Fine by me.
I'm flexible.
Okay, you can reload your browsers now for the final program. 4 p.m. coffee and pastries and XR. Yeah, I think that's it, really.
Well, I'll see you on day 2.
Yeah, look forward to that. So you will be presenting your paper, right?
Still working on it, and I don't know it necessarily lends itself to being presented. It's basically a read-through extended scenario of what it'd be like working in what I think an XR environment of 2048 is going to look like. So we'll see. May I have a couple things to say on day 2?
Yeah, I mean,
because I don't want to just sit there and go reading the whole thing, you know?
No. But considering you have very little time, we all have very little time. You may want to just, sorry, I'm just making sure I have one of these links up on the screen here. Okay, good. What was it? The one that Randall said. If you just, you know, do even a 1-minute abstract, it may be good enough to start a discussion, you know.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll see what I can come up with.
Okay, cool. Yeah, very, very cool. And, after that, we have to work on what we mean by book. And I think our challenge for the book this year is to completely change the notion of a table of contents. Otherwise, you have to first look at the table of contents, then you have to look at the legal stuff, then you have to look at how to read the document, then you have to read my introduction, then you have to read Vince, and then you get to the content. That's a bit stupid. That's a challenge. To fit it into PDF, because we all love PDF.
Oh, that's such a high note to end on. I don't think we can let that fly.
That was trying to click the end meeting button to end on that, but you ruined it for me. Well, I mean, if we can have a more interesting experience in XR, let's do that. And Brendel, please try to load Reader in Vision and text me or email me or text me or somehow communicate whether it's useful or not. That'd be really cool. I think it was kind of shocking when Fabian put the PDF in and it was actually readable. I do think a lot of the use of the headsets will be not the whole space, but to really narrow down and have a private focus space. So it's all very interesting. And my Apple branded watch just beeped. We're on the hour. So for some of you, have a safe trip. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And for the rest of you, look forward to seeing you virtually on Wednesday. Thank you
Yes.
very much for today. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.